On March 26, 1974, on a remote piece of land in Fort George Island, Florida, owned by Jerry and Antoine Betz, a wildfire broke out in the middle of the night.
Imagine wandering through a scorched, ash-blackened Florida forest, only to stumble upon a flawless, heavy metallic orb sitting perfectly untouched by the flames, a strange object that would soon be known to the world as the Betz Sphere. This pristine anomaly seemed to possess its own chilling, autonomous intelligence, baffling military minds by rolling uphill and quite literally humming along to acoustic music. But what scientists have finally uncovered in the deep structure of the Betz Sphere doesn't just close a 50-year-old cold case, it completely redefines where terrestrial engineering ends and the truly unexplained begins. The ash-strewn discovery on Fort George Island. We travel back to March 27, 1974. Fort George Island, a subtropical, heavily wooded strip of land nestled just off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. It is a place thick with Spanish moss, ancient live oaks, and dense palmetto scrub. On this particular spring afternoon, the coastal air still carried the sharp, incredibly acrid smell of ozone, charred pine, and wet soot. A sudden, massive brush fire had recently swept across a massive 88-acre tract of land owned by the Betz family, leaving behind a black, smoldering, and desolate scar on the landscape. As the smoke finally cleared, 3 members of the family, Antoine Betz, a chemical engineer, his wife, Jerry, and their 21-year-old son, Terry, a marine biology student, set out onto their charred property to inspect the damage. The ground was still hot beneath their boots, covered in thick ash and littered with blackened skeletal branches. But as they pushed deeper into the devastated brush, Terry spotted something that looked entirely impossible. Nestled in a small, scorched patch of grass was a metallic orb, shining like a beacon. It was a perfectly smooth, highly polished sphere, reflecting the bright Florida sunlight like a pristine mirror. What immediately struck the family as highly anomalous was the object's unbelievable condition. Despite sitting in the direct path of a raging brush fire that had just scorched the earth all around it, the metallic object was remarkably cool to the touch. There were absolutely no scorch marks, no black soot, and not a single scratch on its reflective surface. The only distinguishing feature on its otherwise flawless exterior was a tiny, raised triangular symbol, barely 3 millimeters wide, etched into the steel. Terry bent down and hoisted the heavy object. It was incredibly dense, weighing just over 21 pounds, despite being only about 8 inches in diameter, roughly the size of a bowling ball. Antoine, drawing on his background in engineering, immediately assumed they had stumbled upon some historical artifact. Given Fort George Island's rich colonial history, which stretched back to Spanish explorers and French privateers in the 16th century, he wondered if this was an ancient Spanish cannonball. Yet, a cannonball would have been cast from rough, heavily pitted iron, not this incredibly modern seamless alloy that looked like it belonged in an aerospace laboratory. Perhaps, they reasoned, it was a piece of fallen space debris, a component from a NASA rocket launched from nearby Cape Canaveral, or even a piece of a Soviet satellite that had decayed in orbit and plummeted to Earth. But if it had fallen from space, where was the impact crater? Where was the heat damage from atmospheric re-entry? The legendary Betz Sphere had simply appeared in the ashes, sitting on top of the soil as if it had been gently placed there by an invisible hand. Intrigued by the bizarre artifact, Terry wrapped the heavy object in a jacket, carried it back to their house, and set it on a table in the living room. It was an interesting conversation piece, a shiny curiosity from the woods. Yet, as the hours ticked by, the quiet atmosphere of the home began to shift. The object was not content to remain a simple decorative centerpiece on a wooden table. Neighbors who later visited would whisper about a subtle, electrostatic energy radiating from the metal. The Betz family had absolutely no idea that they had not merely brought an unusual object inside. They had brought in something that was about to wake up. But the true mystery did not begin when the legendary Betz Sphere was first found in the ashes. It began the very moment they brought it inside, when the sphere awoke, the anomalous behaviors. It did not take long for the Betz family to realize that their shiny new souvenir was far more than an inert hunk of industrial metal. For the first few days, the Betz Sphere sat quietly on a table in their living room, looking like nothing more than a giant, polished bearing. But as the family spent more time around it, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. It started with subtle things, a strange tension in the air, a feeling of static electricity that would make the hairs on their arms stand up when they walked past the table. And then Terry Betz decided to play his guitar. Terry, a 21-year-old marine biology student who also loved music, sat down near the Betz Sphere one evening and began strumming his acoustic guitar. The moment the first few chords resonated through the living room, the metallic orb did something impossible. It began to vibrate. It was not just a passive vibration from the sound waves in the room. The Betz Sphere began to emit its own low, rhythmic, throbbing hum that seemed to directly counterstrum Terry's music. The sound was a deep, mechanical frequency that felt as if it were vibrating right through the floorboards and into the bones of anyone standing nearby. When Terry stopped playing, the sphere lingered on a final resonant note before slowly falling silent. When he started again, the sphere immediately answered back. But the acoustic reactions were only a prelude to the kinetic phenomena that would soon terrify the household. The family quickly discovered that the Betz Sphere possessed a bizarre, seemingly independent relationship with gravity and motion. One afternoon, while experimenting with the object on the flat wooden floor of their living room, Terry gently rolled the 21-pound ball across the room. Instead of rolling in a straight line and gradually losing momentum like any normal sphere would, the Betz Sphere rolled forward, came to a sudden, dead stop on its own, spun on its axis, and then slowly curved and rolled right back to Terry's feet. It was a perfect, physics-defying boomerang effect. The family was stunned. They began testing the Betz Sphere on different surfaces. They placed it on a large, heavy wooden table and watched in disbelief as the sphere slowly rolled itself to the very edge of the table, stopped right at the precipice as if examining the drop, and then rolled backward to the center of the table. It seemed to have an acute awareness of its physical surroundings. When they tilted the table to create a steep upward incline, the ball did not slide downward. Instead, it defied gravity, slowly clawing its way uphill against the slope, spinning and vibrating all the way. The strangeness did not stop with movement and sound. The family's pets were the first to signal that something was deeply wrong with the object. The Betzes owned a sweet, usually calm family poodle. The moment the Betz Sphere was activated, or began its quiet, low-frequency humming, the dog's behavior shifted into absolute panic. The poodle would run into the room, whimpering frantically, cover its ears with its paws, and try to scratch its way through the drywall to escape the invisible forces radiating from the metal. It was as if the sphere was blasting out an incredibly high-frequency ultrasonic wave, completely silent to human ears, but excruciatingly painful to animals. Word of these bizarre occurrences quickly leaked out of Fort George Island. Neighbors, friends, and local journalists began crowding into the Betz home to witness the marvels of the self-rolling, guitar-loving orb. Visitors reported feeling a distinct magnetic pull when they put their hands near the metal, and some claimed that touching the sphere gave them a mild, numbing electric shock. The house became a circus of speculation, with people openly wondering if they were dealing with a piece of highly advanced sentient technology. The sphere was no longer just a weird souvenir Terry found in the woods. It was an active, reacting entity that seemed to be observing the household just as much as the household was observing it. The media coverage grew so intense that the story caught the attention of major scientific institutions and ultimately the United States military. The Betz family realized they were entirely out of their depth. They needed answers, and they needed them from someone with the equipment to look inside the metal. Could a simple metal ball truly possess its own sensory system? Or was there an unseen physical force operating within its core? The military moves in, the secret X-rays of Cecil Field. As the press descended on Fort George Island, the quiet life of the Betz family dissolved into a frenzy of flashing cameras and ringing telephones. The Betz Sphere was no longer a local curiosity. It was a national phenomenon. Realizing that the bizarre physical properties of the sphere were beyond their ability to explain, the family knew they had to hand it over to experts. After turned-down requests to various civilian research groups, A sudden formal offer arrived from an authority that could not be ignored: the United States military. Representatives from the U.S. Navy reached out, offering to run the object through rigorous scientific diagnostics at the nearby Jacksonville Naval Air Station, also known as Cecil Field. The family agreed, but with one strict condition: the Navy could not damage, cut, or destroy the Betz Sphere during their analysis. It had to be returned to them in the exact, pristine condition in which it was found. When the 21-pound metallic anomaly arrived at the highly secure military facility, the Navy's top engineers and metallurgists treated it with a mixture of professional curiosity and extreme caution. If this was a piece of downed foreign military tech, a fallen Soviet spy component, or something far more exotic, they needed to find out without triggering any potential internal defense mechanisms. The first step was to determine exactly what the Betz Sphere was made of. The metallurgical tests yielded incredibly precise, yet perplexing results. Spectroscopic analysis revealed that the outer shell of the Betz Sphere was composed of a high-grade 420 stainless steel alloy. This specific type of steel, commonly used in heavy industrial equipment, dental instruments, and aerospace engineering, is highly valued for its intense corrosion resistance and its ability to withstand extreme temperatures and pressures. What baffled the researchers, however, was the seamless perfection of the construction. Despite using the most advanced microscopes available to the military in 1974, they could find no weld seams, no joints, and no indication of how the sphere had been sealed. It was as if the steel had been molded around empty space by a process completely unknown to commercial metalworking. Furthermore, the Navy discovered that the Betz Sphere possessed an incredibly powerful, irregular magnetic field. When mapped, the sphere did not exhibit a standard north-south dipole. Instead, it was found to have 4 distinct magnetic poles, 2 positive and 2 negative, unevenly distributed across its surface. This highly unusual magnetic structure explained some of the localized electromagnetic anomalies that visitors to the Betz household had reported, but it offered no clues as to how such a field had been permanently magnetized into the steel. But the real shockwave came when the military technicians wheeled the Betz Sphere into the radiography lab to look inside. Because the steel outer shell was approximately a half-inch thick, standard medical X-ray machines could not penetrate the dense metal. The Navy had to utilize their most powerful, high-energy industrial radiographic equipment, blasting the sphere with a massive 300 kilovolt X-ray beam. When the radiographic plates were finally developed, the scientists in the room fell silent. The X-ray images revealed that the Betz Sphere was not a solid block of steel. It was a highly complex, hollow container. Suspended inside the main cavity of the outer shell were 2 smaller, distinct spherical objects, referred to by the technicians as internal spherules. These smaller spheres were made of a metal much denser than the outer stainless steel, appearing as dark, solid masses on the X-ray plates. Even more bizarre was the apparent halo, or ring of radiation, that seemed to hover directly around these internal cores, as if a highly pressurized gas or a localized magnetic field was actively keeping the internal spherules suspended in place. The X-rays also showed that a portion of the inner wall of the Betz Sphere had been machined with incredibly precise microscopic grooves, which seemed to line up with the external 3mm triangular symbol etched on the outer surface. The military's report concluded that the sphere was hollow, containing 2 internal objects with a magnetic density that defied standard structural templates. For the public and UFO researchers tracking the story, this military confirmation was the equivalent of pouring gasoline on a wildfire. The Navy's own X-rays proved that the Betz Sphere was a piece of highly sophisticated, precisely engineered technology. It wasn't a solid metal ball. It was an active machine with moving parts, internal magnetic fields, and a mysterious core. Though the Navy officially concluded that the object was of terrestrial origin, they could not explain how a highly advanced hollow-core dual spherule device had ended up sitting cool and untouched in a blackened Florida forest. When the testing was complete, they honored their agreement and returned the intact Betz Sphere to the Betz family. But the mystery had now escalated from a Florida campfire tale to a matter of potential national security. When the military's top metallurgists hit a wall of classified silence, the scientific elite stepped forward with far more alarming theories. Extreme hypotheses, alien probes, and antimatter cores. With the U.S. Navy's radiographic files officially leaked to the press, the mystery of the Betz Sphere exploded into the global scientific community. The discovery of a hollow steel shell housing two floating internal spherules, a bizarre four-pole magnetic field, and a mysterious radioactive halo was simply too tempting for speculative minds to ignore. As the military stepped back, electing to play its cards close to its chest, a wave of unorthodox scientists, ufologists, and elite professors descended upon Florida. They were determined to look past the military's conservative assessments and explore the possibility that the Betz Sphere was something truly cosmic. Chief among these researchers was Dr. James Albert Harder, a highly respected professor of civil and hydraulic engineering at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Harder was not a fringe conspiracy theorist. He was a brilliant academic who had worked with NASA and the military on complex structural mechanics. However, he also possessed a deep intellectual curiosity regarding the UFO phenomenon. Intrigued by the Jacksonville naval reports, Dr. Harder traveled to Florida to personally examine the Betz Sphere and analyze the Navy's original 300 kilovolt X-ray plates. What he concluded would send a jolt of pure panic through the media. In the realm of theoretical physics, such elements exist in what is known as the island of stability, hypothetical, super-heavy elements that could only be synthesized in the high-energy environments of collapsing stars or by an incredibly advanced civilization. Dr. Harder went on to deliver a public, spine-chilling warning at a Congress of ufologists in Chicago. He cautioned that if anyone attempted to drill into, cut, or forcefully open the Betz Sphere, they could inadvertently trigger a catastrophic release of energy. He speculated that the internal spherules might be suspended in a state of absolute equilibrium, perhaps serving as a catalyst for a localized antimatter reaction or containing a highly pressurized radioactive payload. In his view, the Betz Sphere was not just an inert machine, it was a dormant, potentially volatile piece of extraterrestrial hardware. It is, Dr. Harder warned, like a live grenade sitting in a living room. As Dr. Harder's terrifying warning grabbed headlines, another towering figure in the study of anomalies arrived on the scene, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. As an astronomer and the former scientific advisor to the U.S. Air Force's famous UFO investigation, Project Blue Book, Dr. Hynek was the world's most credible investigator of unexplained phenomena. He helped assemble a blue ribbon panel of scientists, including representatives from the prestigious Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, to conduct their own independent tests on the Betz Sphere. The theories put forward by this scientific panel read like the pages of a classic science fiction novel. Some scientists hypothesized that the Betz Sphere was a passive, automated sensory device dropped from a passing extraterrestrial craft. Its purpose? To quietly monitor Earth's atmospheric conditions, electromagnetic frequencies, and biological life forms. This would explain why the sphere reacted so dynamically to the acoustic vibrations of Terry's guitar. It was programmed to analyze and record acoustic signals. Others suggested the sphere had been buried deep in the Florida marshland for thousands of years, only exposed to the surface by the recent brush fire. They theorized it could be a piece of lost prehistoric Earth technology, an artifact from a forgotten civilization that had mastered advanced physics and metallurgy long before the rise of modern humanity. Because of the sphere's bizarre rolling behaviors and its four-pole magnetic matrix, a few researchers argued it was a gyroscopic navigational component from a crashed alien spacecraft designed to calculate gravity and magnetic north simultaneously to guide a ship through three-dimensional space. The world watched, utterly spellbound. For a brief, wild moment in the mid-70s, it felt as though humanity was on the absolute brink of proving we were not alone in the universe. The Betz Sphere stood as a physical, tangible monument to this hope, a 21-pound puzzle that sat quietly on a coffee table in Florida, humming its mysterious tune while the world's greatest minds argued over its cosmic origins. Yet, as the theories reached these cosmic proportions, a trail of forgotten earthly history began to emerge from a most unexpected source. The industrial blueprint, the ball check valve discovery. While the global media was consumed by visions of super-heavy alien elements and theoretical antimatter cores, a group of grounded engineers and industrial researchers began looking at the Betz Sphere through a much more practical lens. They bypassed the sensational headlines and focused strictly on the physical dimensions, the metallurgy, and the precise mechanical tolerances of the object. When they stripped away the outer layer of speculative sci-fi, they realized that the mysterious sphere didn't match the design of an interstellar probe. It did, however, perfectly match a highly specialized, very heavy-duty piece of industrial hardware manufactured right here on Earth, a ball-check valve. To the average person, a ball-check valve sounds incredibly obscure, but in the world of high-pressure fluid dynamics and chemical engineering, it is a common and vital piece of equipment. These valves are designed to allow liquids or gases to flow through a pipe in only one direction. Inside these massive industrial pipelines, a highly polished, hollow steel ball sits within a chamber. When fluid flows in the correct direction, it pushes the ball aside. If the fluid attempts to flow backward, the pressure forces the ball into a seal, instantly stopping the backflow. Because these systems handle incredibly corrosive chemicals, extreme pressures, and massive temperature fluctuations, the balls must be manufactured with absolute perfection. They are typically made of high-grade 420 stainless steel, the exact alloy detected in the Betz Sphere, and are polished to a mirror shine to ensure a perfect, airtight seal. The Navy's X-rays, which had sparked so much alien speculation, actually provided the definitive proof for this earthly explanation. The three internal spherules and the mysterious halo of gas suspended inside the hollow shell were not components of a theoretical alien engine. Instead, they were the remnants of the manufacturing process used to construct these heavy-duty industrial valves. To create a hollow steel ball that can withstand thousands of pounds of pressure without collapsing, manufacturers use a process where smaller, internal steel balls are used as counterweights or spacers during the welding and machining phase. In some designs, these internal spherules are deliberately left inside to act as mechanical dampeners, preventing the main valve ball from vibrating too violently when subjected to high-velocity fluid flows. The microscopic grooves on the inside wall and the tiny triangular symbol etched on the exterior were simply manufacturer alignment marks, used by industrial machinists to calibrate the automated lathe that polished the sphere to its final, seamless state. But if the Betz Sphere was merely an industrial valve, how on earth did it end up sitting pristine and cool in a remote, smoldering Florida forest? The final piece of this terrestrial puzzle fell into place when a New Mexico-based metal sculptor named James Derling Jones read about the Jacksonville media circus. Derling Jones recognized the description of the sphere immediately. 3 years earlier, in April 1971, he had been driving through the Jacksonville area on his way to an art exhibition. He was piloting a cluttered Volkswagen bus, and strapped securely to his makeshift roof rack was a collection of industrial scrap metal he had acquired for his sculptures. Among his cargo were several large, hollow, high-grade steel ball-check valves that he had salvaged from a defunct chemical processing plant. As Derling Jones drove down the bumpy, winding coastal roads near Fort George Island, his roof rack suffered a sudden, violent structural failure. Several of the heavy, polished steel spheres broke free from their restraints, tumbled off the roof of the Volkswagen bus, and bounced deep into the thick, overgrown palmetto brush flanking the highway. Because the spheres were incredibly heavy and the undergrowth was dense, Derling Jones was unable to retrieve all of them. He eventually gave up, repaired his roof rack, and continued on his journey, leaving the lost industrial valves buried in the Florida brush. There they sat, completely hidden by the subtropical foliage, for 3 long years, until a sudden brush fire swept through the Betz property in 1974, burning away the dense palmetto scrub and exposing one of the lost, polished spheres to the afternoon sun. The timeline matched perfectly. The metallurgy matched perfectly. The physical dimensions matched perfectly. The terrifying alien artifact that had baffled Berkeley professors and military intelligence officers was, in reality, a piece of discarded industrial plumbing that had fallen off the roof of a traveling artist's station wagon. If the object itself was a piece of human machinery, how do we explain the eerie, intelligent movements that witnesses swore they saw with their own eyes? The physics of illusion. How the sphere awoke. With the industrial origin of the Betz Sphere established, one massive question still hung in the air. How do we explain the eerie, intelligent movements that eyewitnesses swore they saw with their own eyes? If the sphere was just a hollow stainless steel ball check valve, why did it roll uphill, hum along to guitar chords, and terrify the family dog? The answer doesn't lie in alien technology, but in a fascinating intersection of microtopography, kinetic energy, and sympathetic resonance. First, we have to look at the legendary boomerang rolling behavior. The Betz family lived in an old, rustic Florida home with wooden floorboards. To the human eye, these floors looked flat, but old houses are notorious for having subtle, microscopic slopes and uneven beams. Because the Betz sphere was an industrial valve machined to near-perfect sphericity, its friction coefficient was incredibly low. It was, for all practical purposes, a perfectly balanced rolling machine. When Terry rolled the 21-pound ball, it didn't take much to alter its path. A microscopic dip in a wooden floorboard, completely invisible to the naked eye, would easily catch the rolling sphere, halt its forward momentum, and send it rolling back along the slope toward the center of the room. To a family already primed to expect the unusual, this looked like autonomous intelligence. In reality, it was just gravity acting on a near-frictionless object navigating the hidden valleys of an uneven floor. The same physical principles explain the sphere's gravity-defying uphill climb on tilted tables. When the family tilted a wooden table, they assumed the ball should roll down. However, the heavy internal spherules inside the hollow core of the Betz sphere were not fixed. They were free-floating. When the table was tilted, the heavy internal balls would shift inside, changing the sphere's center of gravity. As the internal weights rolled forward inside the shell, they created a mechanical imbalance that forced the outer shell to roll upward to find a new equilibrium. It was a mechanical illusion, a real-world demonstration of shifting mass. But what about the acoustic humming? When Terry strummed his guitar, the Betz sphere reportedly vibrated and buzzed in response. This is a classic case of sympathetic acoustic resonance. Every hollow object has a resonant frequency, a specific tone that causes it to vibrate naturally. Because the Betz sphere was a hollow steel shell housing loose internal metal parts, it acted as a highly sensitive physical resonator. When Terry hit certain chords on his acoustic guitar, the sound waves traveling through the air matched the natural resonant frequency of the hollow ball. The sphere didn't decide to hum back. It was physically forced to vibrate by the acoustic energy in the room, causing the loose internal spherules to rattle against the inner walls. This brings us to the whimpering poodle. Dogs have incredibly sensitive hearing, capable of detecting frequencies up to 45,000 Hz, well beyond the human limit of 20,000 Hz. When the Betz sphere vibrated in response to footsteps, guitar music, or even passing traffic, the friction of the metal-on-metal interior created high-frequency, ultrasonic squeaks. While these sounds were completely silent to the Betz family, they were agonizingly loud and piercing to their dog, causing the pet to panic whenever the ball began to move. But as the physical laws of our world reclaimed the sphere, the object itself slipped away into the shadows of history. With the laws of physics reclaiming the Betz sphere, the pristine anomaly quietly slipped back into the shadows of private history. Yet, its legacy remains a beautiful monument to human curiosity, proving that the boundary between science and wonder is often just a matter of perspective. If you loved this mystery, subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.